Bio here. Mark grew up sailing out of Victoria, where he always took every chance he could get out on the water. Today he is a senior Zodiac skipper and wildlife guide at Prince of Wales whale watching out of Victoria, where he shares his passion for the ocean with people from all over the world. Since 1997, Mark has been photographing whales throughout the year to help researchers understand whale movements in southern BC. He's a lead contributor to photo ID catalogs of transient killer whales of Washington and BC and Alaska. He is documenting humpback whales off southern Vancouver Island in Washington. His humpback whale catalog is produced in collaboration with the Center for Whale Research and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Ken told me that he could see that Mark was serious and tenacious when he saw that he would do 3 whale watch trips and then get in his own Zodiac and go out on the water and photograph some more, just to make sure he covered all he possibly could. So the talk is tracking transient killer whales and humpback whales of the Salish Sea using individual photo ID. Take it away, Mark.
First of all, I'd like to thank Howie for having me here today to share my experiences and photographs of the last 16 years of working in these waters of the Salish Sea. I'm not a scientist, but I have kept accurate log notes of all my encounters since 1997. Through my photographs and log notes, I've been able to help a lot of other researchers and scientists to collect data on all the whale species that visit these waters. So I'm going to first talk about how I got started in photo identifying whales, which led me to meeting the pioneers of killer whale research and had the opportunity and the privilege of working with these guys and women. The talk has 2 components. The first part is going to be a main focus on transient killer whales that I've seen in these waters. I'll be sharing photos and stories of my encounters. And then the next part is going to be a brief overview of the returning humpback whales, and I'll introduce some of the regular animals that have been returning to these waters that I consider regulars. This is my office for a large part of the year, where I interact with people from all over the world. Obviously a perfect day here. You can spot animals very well. Occasionally the weather kicks up and you don't see much of anything, so try and get your passengers home safely. Just for the record, I wouldn't leave the dock on a day like this. This map shows the area of operation that typically work out of. Encompasses much of southern Vancouver Island. On a 3-hour trip, I can occasionally get all the way out to the waters to the west, out towards Port Renfrew there. That would be an extreme trip out to the west. Then I get up into the waters of southern Strait of Georgia, all through the San Juans. And then occasionally I get down into the entrance to Puget Sound. Here we are here in Coupeville. See, it's not too far as the crow flies from Victoria. Before I started working with Prince of Wales, I had seen killer whales on occasion in my times out sailing, but I had no idea there were potentially 3 ecotypes of killer whales that could be seen right here in my backyard, and I certainly had never seen a humpback whale. I was an avid photographer right from the beginning, so I'd pack a camera with me on all my trips and opportunistically take photos of the whales any chance I could. I would pore over the photo catalog books written by John Ford, Graham Ellis, Ken Balcom. And I'd continue to collect ID shots of my own, especially the transient killer whales that would pass through these waters. In my early years, I didn't see that many transient killer whales, except regulars like this one here, T20. I have repeat encounters with animals like this. He was a very distinctive animal. You can see his notch up top there. But all the whale watching community could recognize this one. was always curious that he was traveling with another female. In this shot, you can see T20 here with T21, his probable mom. This is Sydney Island in the background and Harris Strait. This is my first encounter with T20 and 21. I've seen them on 70 different encounters. This is another well-known animal that we used to see a lot, T14, also known as Pender. He would cruise it. This is him heading into the southern tip of Trial Island. He would often go into the kelp bed. He would often go into the kelp bed, occasionally in and out of the current, lay on his back, do tail lobs. He was always seen with his presumed mom until about 1998 at T14. His mom, T13. When she went missing, his probably dead, I would imagine. So he turned into a solo male. Circumnavigate Vancouver Island in a counterclockwise direction most of the time. And he could do that within 2 weeks. His regular sightings of him around the coast would prove this from colleagues of mine. I could just about count on when he would show up in Victoria. Also very distinctive. If you look on his dorsal fin there on the leading edge, a couple of big divots out of it, he had a radio transmitter attached to him. He and his mom down in Butt Inlet in 1976. The scar tissue built up over 5 stainless steel surgical pins that were used to attach the tag. The pin stayed in. My last encounter with T14 was in October of 2010. He was seen in January of 2011 in Johnson Strait, Blackfish Sound. He has since been removed from the catalog, so we assume he's died. This is a shot Ken took down in Butt Inlet when T14 Pender was just a young male. They're just bolting this VHF transmitter pack right to the fin. Stayed on for about 5 months. This is another solo male that I would see on occasion. Well, fairly regularly. The last sighting of him that I had was in 2005. The shot was taken near Race Rocks. He was first identified in 1977 off Tofino. Then he went missing for 13 years when he was resighted at the top end of Haida Gwaii, northern British Columbia, at Langer Island. So 13 years went by and then he reappeared. Although highly unlikely, I do have high hopes that he'll surprise us and reappear. Another solo male here, T31, would show up quite regularly. Spent a lot of time on the west coast of Vancouver Island, according to a colleague of mine. He cruised up and down the coast of the West Coast Trail. Didn't see him last year, but I have a feeling he'll probably show up again, hopefully. And before my involvement in the early 90s, he was always with his presumed mom. And she was last seen in 1995, I believe. As Howie's talk mentioned from Emma's paper, killer whales are big mama's boys, transients included. But we do see dispersal with transient killer whales from their families, from their mothers. As in this case here, T124C in the foreground, young male, dispersed from his mom before she went missing, T124. You see here in this shot with T93 and T97. See, animals like these that really intrigue me. Actually, I'm just going to carry on. I'm not quite there yet. Sorry. This is a female that I saw in June, just this past June, T91. First time I ever encountered her, and the first time I ever encountered a single female transient roaming around. Dave Elephant saw her up in Alaska, and she's been very rarely seen. Her son was last seen in 2005, T91. She was seen here off of Oak Bay, skulking through the Chain Islands. It was just happening. I just spotted her at the corner of my eye. I was just heading to see some residents up north. This is T87 and T88. T87 are the big males. Last time I saw him with his mom back in 2010. She hasn't been seen since and has been removed from the catalog. He was actually spotted off Port Townsend yesterday. I believe Brad Hansen got on him. He was with T90 and I think the T86As. These two are a couple of solo males, T49C on the left, and T103. I would typically see T103 on his own, since his mom went missing in 2007. It's the animals like these that really intrigue me, because I'm just always wondering who they're associating with, where they're wandering to between sightings, and what kind of trouble they get themselves into. T49C, his mom, T49, is missing. Not sure if he dispersed from her before she died, but he's often not with his family. He takes off from his sisters to go hang out with big lads like that guy. So you can see, here we are in Malleson, the star. This map shows the broad range that transients have. They have just an enormous territory they cover. They go all the way up north, Glacier Bay, southeast Alaska, they've been documented, and all through southeast Alaska, Haida Gwaii, down through all these inlets, which are very, very vast, all around Vancouver Island, Georgia Strait, Puget Sound, all the way down to California. It's just incredible territory they cover. This shot here I took in April 2009 of the T30s with T172. Since I had my first encounter with them in January 2005, which I believe is the first time the T30s had ever been seen in this area. Since my first encounter with them in 2005, I've seen them about 46 times to date in this area. Became more and more interested in the whales were all about, so I'd go out after work and take off with my little 11.5-foot Zodiac I used to have and photograph the whales. This shot's actually of the legendary J1 Ruffles. I was from J-Pod. I was the last one to photograph him alive in November of 2010. Had a lot of memorable and unique experiences with that little boat, like this encounter here with some offshore killer whales that I saw up in Saanich Inlet. In 2002, September, they came into our inside waters. Earlier that year, I picked up a group of offshores, my first sighting of offshores out in the Juan de Fuca Strait, heading west quickly in April of 2002. I was pretty excited. They were very cool looking animals, so I exhausted the 3 rolls of slide film that I had in my pelican case. When they returned into Saanich Inlet in September, took that little red boat out, photographed them in Finlayson Arm. I actually ran into Ken and Dave that day when they were coming out, and they were wondering, who's this guy? This little 11.5-foot boat. The following day, they ended up in Cowichan Bay, a little to the north. This is where I first met John Ford in the field. Although John didn't remember me, I went to a talk he gave at the university in 2000. University of Victoria in 2000, he gave a talk on killer whales. At the end of his talk, I gave him some prints of a group of killer whales where northern residents had seen off Souk in October of '99. He tucked them into his blazer pocket and said he'd give them to Graham Ellis and get back to me with IDs. Next to the late Mike Bigg, Graham is the pioneer of photo identifying the transients and northern residents of British Columbia. His favorite line is, "No photo, no proof." The northern residents I photographed that day in October of '99 turned out to be the G12s. That's the furthest south that they'd been seen at that time. Then was invited to work with John Ford as a volunteer on his cetacean surveys, which transit the BC coast and go up into southeast Alaska. I worked as a spotter, photographer, occasionally small boat driver when we deployed on whales. I'll never forget the first time I was on his first survey. I was staring through the big eyes, and he walked up to me and said, "What's going on in that little brain of yours besides dorsal fin?" This is a shot. This is the ship that we work on. This is a shot up in Hecate Strait, top end of British Columbia near Haida Gwaii. It's a shot of T120. He's part of the T17s, which I've never actually seen down in the waters of the Salish Sea. So this allowed me to see the extent of the transient's range by working on these ships. That day, however, they were with the T30s, who are regular visitors. Graham Ellis took a rare time out. This shot here, the water's not bad, but Hecate Strait is quite a shallow, exposed body of water, notoriously rough. But Graham said, why don't you and Jared go out and photograph these guys? I'll watch you guys. And we sat on the bridge, comfort of the bridge, sipping tea in his slippers while we bounced around to take shots of them. That's T-117 surfing down a wave there. This survey work, I'd see animals that we'd see regularly in the Salish Sea, as far north as southeast Alaska, like this group here, right up at the border of Alaska, the T-18s. Within a few days of getting back to work with Prince of Wales, I came across them right off Victoria. They almost beat me back home. Around the same time I was working with John, helping with his studies, I met Ken Balcom. Ken would see me out in the strait, like how I mentioned there, after work, bouncing around this little boat, photographing whales. We had some offshores in 2003 that came back down. And he appreciated my obsession. So we met for beers, and he looked over my photographs, had binders full of slides and prints, and asked if I'd ever thought about shooting digital. Next thing I know, through the center, he bought me my first digital SLR and a laptop computer so I could help him with his work. But I'll never forget, Ken told me not to, in exchange, I got him a cool pair of mittens. He told me not to forget about taking artsy shots. That's what I was getting at. And, you know, it's important to get IDs, but don't forget to take the artsy shots that I like to do. This is it, so like this one. Thank you. I took this shot a couple summers ago. I was just about to put my camera away. I had the hydrophone down, listening to them vocalize, the Southern Residents. Out this L-89, I could hear his fins slicing through the water, sneaking up behind me, and I could see it's going to line up perfectly with the sunset. So I just lucked out, got the shot. Ken ended up, I went over to Ken's place, the center, and saw this boat sitting under the apple tree, growing moss, deflating. I said, what's up with that boat? Next thing I knew it was mine to put to use, clean it up, put to use. It's an upgrade to the 11.5-foot Zodiac. Around that same time, I was on John Ford's research permit, which allowed me to get out and help collect data for him on the transients, photo ID, any other unusual whale species, collect prey samples of the animals in Canadian waters. I've since upgraded to this boat for use under permit. You can, through some of the center's money back when things were doing a little better, he helped me with that boat as well. So thank you, Ken. Of course, when I'm working with Prince of Wales, I'm not under John's permit, so I use a 300mm lens, which enables me to take opportunistic ID shots and still abide by the whale watch regulations of 100-meter minimum approach distance in Canadian waters and 200 yards in U.S. waters. Connecting with these pioneers of killer whale research has enabled me to see some neat parts of the coast and work with whales in other areas. Like this encounter here in 2008, a group of offshore killer whales in Dixon Entrance, which is up the border of Alaska, BC. This shot I took of T-69C. You can see him cruising the shoreline here along Princess Royal Island. It's northern British Columbia. T-69 is what passed by this group of stellars. Perhaps the biggest transient killer whale certainly that I've ever seen, possibly the biggest between California and Alaska, is this guy called Can Opener. Appropriately named. So I'm up off the top end, west coast of Haida Gwaii, northern British Columbia, on one of John Ford's surveys, July 16, 2009. A couple days prior, we saw him 150 miles to the southeast in Queen Charlotte Sound. Couldn't believe it. 6 weeks later, I'm back in Victoria, and he shows up in a transient gathering, approximately 30 transients. A colleague of mine, Brian Gisborne, Had them the night before off the outer coast of Washington at sunset with the same group of transients heading on a line for California. He's cataloged as CA60 or U101, CA for California transient or U for unknown. He normally travels with this female U102. Another memorable experience I had was when I was working with Ken Balcom, helping John Durbin and Bob Pittman on a satellite tagging project they had down in Monterey Bay, California, working with a BBC film crew. You can see John and Ken there. There's Ken driving. John's got his sat tag ready. So they're surrounded by the film crew. The idea was to get tags on the killer whales during the course of the 10 days while the film crew was there, so we could refine them and document gray whale predation. Fortunately for the film crew, we did see an encounter of them dragging around a carcass, but it was the day before they arrived, this group here. But while they were there, I spotted a group of killer whales when I was out with Bob Pittman attacking a minke whale. Fairly short-lived attack, and unfortunately with Ken's boat full of the camera crew, film crew, by the time they got there, you know, pretty big swell, the kill was over, but they did manage to get a bit of footage of the carcass being dragged around. I ended up working in Antarctica in 2008, 2009 for an expedition company. This is a type B killer whale. Notice the large eye patch, as Howie pointed out, some of them, and this dorsal cape that extends into the saddle. Came across this animal when I was shuttling some passengers back to the ship after visiting a Gen 2 penguin colony. What I especially like about this guy is his dorsal fin's kind of on backwards. This is another shot I took of some animals. Again, notice the dorsal cape on the lead animal. This ecotype typically eats penguins and seals. This is another encounter I had. I found them very curious down there, possibly because they regularly would, they wouldn't see humans very often. This one rushed the boat and circled it a few times. I have to admit, it was the first time I felt a little uneasy around killer whales. Now, getting back to the time, the work around here, you know, the whales that I see around here. When Howie asked me to give this talk, I'm like, oh, okay. I thought I should quantify my time on the water and all the different transient killer whales I've had since 1997. Since 1997 to the end of 2012, after going through all my log books, dating right back to 97, I had more than 2,600 days on the water and had 610 encounters of transient killer whales. Group sizes range from 1 to 32. You can see on this graph here, years across the bottom, starting in 99, 97, 98, I have to admit the log notes were a little weak. I didn't really know who I was seeing back then. My notes were like single bull, Johnson Reef, northbound, probably T14, and I couldn't seem to dig through the negatives in time to make that chart a little bit more accurate. You can see there's an increasing trend in the number of animals photographed, where it peaked in 2009 with 120 different individuals. This increasing trend is not only largely due to the increasing effort, not only on my part for spotting from shore when I can, getting out on the whales any chance I can to document them, but also an increased effort on the whale watching community, such as listening to the hydrophones that have been installed at San Juan Island, at Port Townsend. For those of you who don't know, there's one at Sheringham now. So the effort's probably going to increase even more. I mean, I'll look at everybody in this room. A lot of people I've met just in the last 24 hours, I do know, are looking for whales from shore quite often. So then this graph here shows total days on the water by month and corresponding number of transient encounters for all years. You notice on the bottom graph, May, June, and July, a decrease in encounters. That's likely to do with the presence of the southern resident killer whales at that time. A lot of people here in the crowd might notice that there's a drop on days in the water in July. It's like, that doesn't quite make sense. July is a busy time. Well, that's when I tend to escape from work and do sailing competitions and occasionally go up north to do whale surveys with John. But the sightings then increased quite significantly in August, where 32% of my days on the water have transient encounters. And then in September, to 40% of my days on the water have transient encounters. And that's likely, it correlates to the seal pupping season at that time.
Why is that?
Why is... It correlates to the seal pupping season, August and September, when the seal pups are born. And we have a huge resurgence, so we have a lot of transients showing up at that time. Colleagues of mine have a lot of success up in Alaska. They do their field work in Alaska earlier in the year because the seal pups are born earlier the further north you go. This is an encounter, one of my largest groups of transients I've ever seen off East Point. I know there's a few people here today from Saturna. It's a beautiful spot. April 2011, 27 individuals. This shot here, you can see small boat. That's Ken Balcom, Dave Ellifrit from the Center for Whale Research. Dave has worked with Ken since the 90s, and he can probably ID just about every killer whale from California to western Alaska. He's also one of my most early influences. Dave and I have only worked together on a few times on the same boat, but we've shared some great encounters. Biggest group of transients I ever spotted was 2006, February, from my local hilltop. I saw a big group, assumed they were residents coming in, but as they got closer, I recognized a few well-marked bulls, like in this shot here. These three were there, T93, 87, and 97. But what first really tipped me off was the presence of this guy here, T40, Captain Hook. Captain Hook is one of the oldest known males in the transient community. Typically he's seen solo. It's pretty excited. I called Dave and Ken, the center, telling them my sighting. Ken was taken to the skies that day. We're going out with Richard Bach on a Grumman goose. Dave went and grabbed his gear, headed for the boat. I watched them until they had disappeared around the south tip of Discovery, and then I ran to get my boat. Ken spotted them first from the air, came over to Dave and Orca, Ken's little research boat, saw him, dipped his wings to try and dial him in. Dave had no idea what that meant. But we ended up finding them, and between Dave and I, we photographed 32. Following day, I ended up going out on a trip. I headed west out to Juan de Fuca, because Dave had left them the night before, heading north for Vancouver. I thought, they're either gone, or who knows, maybe I'll find them going back out. I actually found them coming back in the Juan de Fuca Strait, quickly, which surprised the heck out of me. It's just amazing the distances these guys cover. They travel faster on average than the resident killer whales. The biggest group of killer whales ever spotted in the Salish Sea was by this gentleman here, Brian Gisborne. Brian Gisborne runs the Juan de Fuca Express water taxi from Banfield to Port Renfrew, and is a long-time field researcher who contracts for John Ford. That day he picked up 35 transients off Swiftsure Bank, followed them into the Juan de Fuca. 7 of them peeled off, 7 more peeled off that he never got to photograph. They headed back west out the shoreline. Interesting thing about studying transients is that, not only they're really dramatic predators, but they have a wide variety of prey, from birds to other whales. Although their most abundant prey is the harbor seal. This is a shot of T49A. He's got a hold of a seal's flipper, tormenting it for a while, and he finally put it out of its misery. Typically after a seal kill or any marine mammal kill, you'll see a slick on the water. And this is in this case, I think this is a shot actually from T14. It was a seal, and it left this huge slick. And you'll smell cucumbers. I don't know if any of you haven't smelled that. Next time you see a slick or a kill from a transient group, smell cucumbers. I don't want to put you off cucumbers, but... Then the birds show up seemingly out of nowhere, grab the scraps, and then the whales move on. This is a shot off Victoria a few years ago, one of the T99s with some seal skin and blubber. This is one of the T46s in December 2011 carrying a big chunk of harbor seal. They often will drag their prey, they'll drag bits and pieces with them as they travel and divide it up. This is T30 leaping on a harbor seal off Victoria in 2008. This is a shot I took in November, just this past November of T97. He was tormenting this poor seal, just circling around it as they were drifting with the ebb current towards 10 Mile Point in Harrow Strait. Went on till sundown. I eventually left, but it still went on. T93, his sidekick, was just watching on the outskirts, putzing around, didn't participate. But typically transients do cooperate in their hunting efforts, as in this case of the T36As and the 49As off Victoria a few years ago hunting a stellar. This was actually a pretty swift and short attack, but normally stellar kills are dragged out over several hours because there is the chance one of them could get hurt. Stellars are pretty tough, so they'll typically drown the stellar sea lion and then eventually tear it up to share it. This is T49A1 leaping in excitement in Harrow Strait back in 2008, I think 9 actually, off Harrow Strait right after stellar kill. I found, going through my log notes, the T49As have been involved in a lot of stellar kills over the years. As in this one again, this is his mom T49, later that year, off Race Passage, and they were circling around this stellar, beating it up a little bit, but they left it. The stellar seemed unharmed. It did swim back to Race Rocks, although pretty shaken up. I do see that a fair bit with transient predation. The killer whales will just sometimes beat up their prey and leave them. Birds, occasionally you'll see them chasing birds, usually when they're goofing around after a kill. This was one of the T46s chasing this common murre around. First time I ever saw a transient take a bird was good old T44, and he leapt out of the water, grabbed a rhinoceros auklet in midair. So harbor porpoise getting bunted by T99. I've been seeing an increase in harbor porpoise sightings in the waters of the Salish Sea in the last few years, and I'm certainly seeing an increase in predation. Typically it's a pretty short or non-existent chase, unlike the Dall's porpoise. That's a shot I took in November, quite late. It was a full moon rise. T49As took out a harbor porpoise. I just about missed it as it was such a short attack. I was admiring the moon rise. T30s once left a trail of harbor porpoise carcasses behind them. Killed 4 within a couple hours. Transients typically will leave, you'll see the lungs floating at the surface or they don't get punctured. You can't blame them for leaving them behind. This is a chunk of elephant seal, northern elephant seal, that we collected when the T121s and 151s left it behind up in Camano Sound, another one of John's surveys. That's northern British Columbia. Graham Ellis and I were out. Earlier in the day, we encountered T142 and 143 at a kill site. We picked up some samples out of the water, analyzed later, also elephant seal. In my 16 years of observing transients, I've never actually witnessed an elephant seal attack. There's T44 in 2006, skulking around the sea lion haul-out, stellar sea lion haul-out at Race Rocks. He would show up like clockwork every August. He and his sister and his mom, the T41s, they'd skulk the shoreline from Race Rocks to the waters off Victoria Oak Bay. They'd enter Victoria Harbour on a few occasions. One time the air traffic controller had to tell the seaplanes to watch that there were killer whales on the runway. This is him in one of my last encounters in September of 2008 when he was helping the rest of the T41s take out a stellar. They ended up in Port Angeles Harbor later that day. That's him jumping on a seal. T-44's body was recovered 6 months later, March 29th, 2009, up in Galetas Channel, northern Vancouver Island, North Park Hardy, and a full necropsy was done on him. The owner of these dogs was fishing when T-60D swam by, Beachy Head, East Sioux Park. I told my passengers to watch the reaction of these dogs because over the years I've seen they just go berserk and they seem to be so in tune. They were way ahead of the guy fishing. He didn't see it until it was kind of already gone by. I've heard of a dog jumping in the water with off a boat with groups of killer whales passing by. Some transients are rarely seen, like this pair here, U38 and U39, as in unknowns. Shots taken off Victoria. Typically I see them together. I've had them on a few occasions over the years, but I have seen them, the first time I saw them, and I didn't even know it, was back in 2004, they were at the T185s. Saw them later in 2008 with, in the vicinity of the T2s, then T20 and 21 showed up. T20 didn't like it. These guys were hanging around, defending his turf maybe, so they kind of danced, they took off. Then I saw them again in November 2009 when the T103 and the T49As were around. They kind of fit more of the mold of California transients, although they've never actually been documented in California. They spent several days off Victoria in November of 2009 calling the seal population. I watched them take out 5 within a couple hours. I was out with Brian Gisborne. Watched them take out 5 in a couple hours one of those days. This is U38, a spy hopping with a belly full of seals. This is another one of my favorites, T10B, big lads spy hopping, checking out a whale watcher that was shut down off the entrance to Victoria Harbor back in January 2011. This I took in November, just last year, of 123C, that little one with his big brother, and 23A, they're high-speed porpoising towards Trial Island off Victoria. I figured they were probably chasing down something, and sure enough, they ended up getting a seal. And then 123A leapt in excitement after the kill. Many transients pass quietly through these waters unnoticed. But you know, we find it interesting to study transients, not only because they're a very charismatic predator and often elusive, but they're at the top of the food chain and must play an important role in marine ecosystems. The more we get to know about them, the easier it's going to be to protect them and their habitat. So to conclude this section, within this photo catalog of big transient killer whales, which extend from southeast Alaska right into our waters here in northern Washington, we've cataloged approximately 280 of them. This is a catalog that we put together last year. I do have some copies if anybody throughout the day want to get a hold of some. They are for sale. And approximately 200 of the transients in the community are considered unknown, which we consider are in the gray box. That is, they aren't seen with known transients in inshore waters very often. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the humpback whales of the Salish Sea before we break for lunch here. As many of you are aware, the humpback whales were depleted through this area from commercial whaling by the 1900s. They're now making a very good return to this area after a long absence. But it's only really been in the last decade that we're seeing consistent sightings of them. I started photo cataloging humpback whales in 1999, my first unique ID. Put together a catalog thanks to the Center for Whale Research and for the design and the layout. Thanks to the Cetacean Research Lab and the NIMO for helping with the IDs. Photographed, I've got 42 unique animals now cataloged, although I've seen over 50. And as many of you know, they show up here typically late summer, early fall for their feeding purposes, and then they migrate south to either Hawaii or Mexico for calving and mating. I have been noticing a lot of them returning here earlier each year. This is a shot of Big Mama, I call her, BC-Y0324. It's the first humpback whale that I ever photographed in these waters in 1999. She returned in 2003 with a calf and has since had 4 calves, including one this year. This is Big Mama here, BC-Y0324, with her 2012 calf. What makes this special is these humpback whales are returning to the areas where their mom introduced them to. This is the first time I was lucky enough to get a shot of Big Mama breaching. I thought Big Mama was an appropriate name for her because she seems to be the pioneer of the returning humpbacks in this area, and not only that, she is a very large animal. That's her in the top right corner of my one of the pages of my catalog. You'll notice a couple animals. I've got notes that they've been matched to the islands of Hawaii. It is thought that the humpback whales that we see here in southern Vancouver Island, well, southern British Columbia, from Tofino south, Washington State, are Mexican animals. Not Mexican, but they're mating and calving in the waters of Mexico. The numbers have been assigned, the BC numbers have been assigned by the Cetacean Research Program, Civic Biological Station in Nanaimo, BC for British Columbia, and then X, Y, or Z, depending on the pigmentation of the ventral side of the fluke. So you can see X is predominantly black, 0 to 20% white. The Y flukes, 20 to 60% white pigmentation, and then the Z flukes are 60 to 100% white. Bottom right corner, BCZ-0298 is Big Mama's 2006 calf. It's returned here every year since she introduced it. You can see there in 2006, split fin, or I called it split fin because it returned the following year with a split in its fin. The BCZ-0298, 2006, 2007. Until it lifted its tail, I had no clue that it was the same animal. You can see it there, the wound's healed up really well, and it's an energetic whale interacting with some stellars that it seemed to be harassing it when it was feeding. Notice the two marks there on the right-hand side of the fluke. Other than those 2 marks, the fin has transformed a fair bit over the years. It's another one of my regulars, well-marked animal, Heather. I call her Heather because of this H right there. I think it's obvious. First saw her in 2003, and she's since come here every year since 2003. She herself has brought 3 calves here, one in 2006, one in 2010, and then again this year. That's her down the bottom right corner, page of my catalog, BCY0160. This is her 2012 calf. Between she and Big Mama, they're certainly doing their part repopulating these waters. This is Heather breaching after waking up after a long rest a few years ago off Victoria Harbor. This is her spy hopping. She seems to be turning out to be one of my more photogenic of the regular humpback whales. This is her 2006 calf I call Split Fluke. I thought it was appropriately named. You can see the split killer whale rink marks in that left-hand corner. There's also some there. Humpback whales often have evidence of killer whale attacks, and it's typically in their first years the theory that they get those attacks. Interestingly enough, Heather's calf this year had evidence of killer whale attack, rake marks there. I didn't see it again since my last encounter with Heather in October. It seemed healthy, it was spy hopping, playing in a tide line and some kelp. But then I had Heather many more times up until December 28th, my last sighting of Heather. And no sign of the calf. So I'm hoping that it either decided, I'm hoping it returned down to some warmer waters with another animal, and I'll get surprised next year. It'll show up. I had to put this shot in. This is taken from northern Vancouver Island out in Johnson Strait, a lunge-feeding humpback whale. So I thought I'd show it off. But you can see right in its mouth, baleen plates, and its tongue. So this is a graph I put together just showing the individual humpback whales photographed from 1997 to 2012. '99 was the first time I saw Big Mama. That's actually her there. '97, I'm fairly confident that it is her, but I can't prove it because I was still taking those artsy shots, and I had the shot with the flukes on the horizontal rather than showing the ventral side. Big year in 2005, 19 humpbacks. Of those 19, only 5 have returned in subsequent years. And then we had another good year in 2011, so I'm hoping that it's going to be an increasing trend, and we're going to see more and more humpback whales repopulating this area. This map just gives a representation of where I typically am seeing them. And waters of Victoria seem to be the spot. South of Victoria, Constance Bay, sort of in that area. A lot of animals over the years. Off of Race Rocks, Souk, Wandapuka. But I have been seeing them filtering into the waters of the San Juan. Some of the regular animals like Big Mama and Heather took their calves here earlier this year, or late last year, up into here. Sydney Island, Moresby Island, and even into Rosario. I had one off Whitby Island. So they're moving around a bit. So to conclude, out of the 42 whales that I have cataloged so far with BCID numbers, approximately 1/3 have returned in at least 2 different seasons. 3 have returned with calves. And I would consider, of all those whales, only 6 to be sort of regular visitors to the waters around here. So I want to thank you very much for coming out today, and it's a pleasure. Enjoy your lunch. I was trying to escape, sorry.
We aren't going to let him off that easy. We do have time for a few questions. We're running a little bit late for lunch. But
Yeah, sorry, does anyone have any questions?
Do you sell your photos or have a book?
She's asking if I sell any photos. I do sell photos. I'm not actively trying to sell them, but I sell them to some of the passengers I take out occasionally. I do have a website, killerwhalephotography.com, and it does help to get extra money so I can pay for fuel and get out and help Fisheries and Oceans Canada maintain an accurate record of the transients. So if anyone is interested, sure, you can check out my website. And if anyone would like to get a photo catalog, these are all the whales, left and right sides of the transient killer whales. We put it out last summer. A lot of these photos I've contributed, but the lead authors, John Ford, Graham Ellis, and Jared Towers, who's their walking catalog. He goes over all my data, but they are available. I have quite a few of them. Any other questions? Well, the males start sprouting their fin as early as 10 years sometimes. We get fooled, like that one animal that was with T93 and T97, 124C. I thought that was a female for the longest time, but he's since sprouted. So the fin will sprout, but 10 or 11 is usually when we can first get signs of that. It gets a little floppier, and then it just starts taking off. How many whales? Well, in that big year in 2009, I saw 120 different transients, but a lot of those animals I would have seen over and over again, but 120 unique different transients in the Salish Sea in 2009. The biggest year for humpback whales that I got unique IDs was 19 in 2008. So it varies. I'm out a lot. So. Yeah, I feel very privileged that I have the opportunity to get out there. The question is, why are they coming back? I feel that they figured out that this is a very rich area. There's a huge number of seal pups, seals in this area, and they're just coming in and they're controlling. They're controlling that seal population. We used to call seals as recently as the 1970s in this area. Killer whale, government didn't really know that maybe nature can sort itself out. So I think a lot to do. It's just a very productive area, and they're figuring it out. Like the T30s, for example, never saw them prior to 2005, and they've been here all close to 50 times that I've seen. That doesn't include all the times we're missing them.
Mark, have you been out on the water where you encountered both residents and transients in close proximity?
Yeah, the question is, have I ever encountered residents and transients at in the same time, the same proximity? I have. Interesting, a quick story. I had a group of resting residents heading west off Victoria, and we had a group of transients coming in from Race Rocks, and I thought this is going to be interesting because they were definitely on a collision course. Residents, when they're resting, are quiet. Transients, unless they're celebrating after a kill, are quiet. So they came together, and literally it was until they almost bumped into each other. One of the juveniles in the resident pod was alerted, and there was a little commotion, and then the transients hightailed as fast as they could go to the south. Several members of the Southern Resident clan chased them, and then that was all over. That's the most dramatic that I've witnessed, but there's been several encounters over the years of that being witnessed, like in proximity. They tend to give each other a wide range, and it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, I think, but they need to acknowledge, keep their distance from each other. Transients are outnumbered typically.
Are you seeing the humpbacks that you're seeing here, are they being identified in Hawaii and in Mexico?
Well, that's a good question. I think we need to get more matches. I've got 4 matches to the humpback whales of this area, to the Hawaiian Islands, but it's likely that the majority are from Mexico. If you get north of Estevan Point, which is off Tofino, north of there, it's kind of more natural migration to go to Hawaii. So that's what they're finding. But the animals around here, I just haven't had enough time to get all of them matched. I really need to get some work with some people in Mexico, spend some more time.
When you're close to them in the inflatable, do they ever try to interact with you or talk to you?
Typically, good question. Do they ever interact with me when I'm in the inflatable? Typically, when I first come across them, if I'm out under, when I was out under permit one time, Rhonda and I headed out one morning, we followed up a report. All of a sudden, I spotted them offshore me, so I slowed down to stop. They actually turned, and T100, the matriarch, came over towards me, and she actually rushed the boat a little bit. And I was a little ways inshore of them, so they actually came to me. They are curious, so you'll get that initial. They might go out of their way to come over to you, but once they've kind of figured out who you are, then they pretty much ignore you. Transients are, they like just kind of doing their thing.
Do you know anything about the transients that have been seen in Hood Canal?
Hood Canal is a lot of the transients that we see from southeast Alaska all through these waters. Yeah, Hood Canal has been a hot spot. I've never been down into Hood Canal with killer whales myself, but I know over the years there's been animals that come down in the winter, and clean out the seals perhaps. But off the top of my head, I don't know which different animals have frequented those waters, but it is a hot spot. Lunch. If anybody wants to talk to me throughout the day, thank you.